Sarah Mitchell was 32 years old when she stood in the middle of her own wedding reception and watched her parents be systematically excluded from every tradition that mattered. 3 hours earlier, her mother in law had rewritten the seating chart, moving Sarah's parents to a corner table near the kitchen doors. 2 hours earlier, her father in law had given the welcome toast without mentioning Sarah's family once. 1 hour earlier, Sarah had watched her mother stand alone at the edge of the dance floor, holding a gift envelope no one had acknowledged. When the DJ called for the mother-son dance and Sarah's mother turned toward the exit with tears she would not let fall, Sarah knew what she had to do. Before the night ended, both families would understand exactly whose wedding this was. But only one family would still be standing when the lights came up. If this story resonates with you, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time in the comments. She loves knowing where you are listening from. Sarah had grown up in Greenfield, a small town in western Pennsylvania, where her father managed the county library system and her mother taught piano lessons from their living room. They were quiet people who valued education, kindness, and keeping their word. Sarah's older sister Emily had been the easy child, the one who made honor roll without trying, the one who married her high school sweetheart in a ceremony their parents planned down to the last napkin fold. Sarah had been the complicated one. Not difficult, just different. She asked too many questions. She read books that made her parents nervous. She chose journalism over teaching, Chicago over Greenfield, independence over the path they had imagined for her. Her parents had not disowned her for these choices. They had done something more painful. They had been politely disappointed for 15 years. When Sarah brought Daniel home for Thanksgiving in her 30th year, her mother had set the table with the good china but served the meal in near silence. Her father had asked Daniel 3 questions about his work in commercial real estate, nodded at each answer, and returned to his newspaper. Emily had monopolized the conversation with stories about her children's piano recitals and soccer tournaments. At the end of the weekend, Sarah's mother had hugged her at the door and said, "He seems very ambitious, dear." The word ambitious had landed like a diagnosis. Sarah's grandmother, Ruth, had been the only person in her family who had ever looked at her without reservation. Ruth had lived in a cottage at the edge of Greenfield with a garden she tended until her hands could no longer grip the shears. She had taught Sarah how to make pie crust, how to read the weather in the evening sky, and how to recognize when someone was performing concern rather than feeling it. When Sarah had called to tell her about the engagement, Ruth had laughed her deep smoker's laugh and said, "Good, marry him. Build your own table. Invite who you want." Ruth had died 3 months before the wedding. She had left Sarah an envelope with instructions not to open it until the wedding day. Sarah had kept that envelope in her desk drawer, waiting. The signs had been everywhere if she had known how to read them. The trouble had started small. At the engagement party Daniel's parents hosted at their country club outside Philadelphia, Sarah's parents had arrived in the Ford sedan they had driven for 12 years. Daniel's father had made a joke about valet parking being wasted on practicality. Sarah's mother had smiled tightly and said nothing. During the toasts, Daniel's mother Caroline had spoken for 8 minutes about the Whitmore family legacy, their summer home in Cape May, their membership at Marion, their commitment to excellence in all things. She had mentioned Sarah once in passing as a lovely addition to our traditions. Sarah's father had not given a toast. No one had asked him to. At the dress fitting 6 months before the wedding, Caroline had brought her sister and her best friend. Sarah had invited her mother and Emily. Caroline's group had taken over the bridal suite, critiquing every gown Sarah tried on with the efficiency of a design review board. When Sarah had stepped out in the dress she loved, a simple silk sheath with cap sleeves, Caroline had tilted her head and said, "It's very minimalist. Is that the look we're going for?" Sarah's mother had been sitting in a chair against the wall, holding her purse in her lap. She had not said anything. The menu tasting had been worse. Daniel's parents had insisted on attending. Sarah's parents had been invited but had mentioned the drive from Greenfield was difficult on a weekday. Caroline had brought a binder with photographs of previous family weddings. She had noted which caterers had failed to meet Whitmore standards. When Sarah had suggested a buffet-style dinner to make the event feel more relaxed, Caroline had touched her arm and said, "Darling, we don't do buffets. People remember how they were served." At the rehearsal dinner, Daniel's father Richard had given a speech about how the Whitmore men had always married women who elevated them. He had gestured to his wife, his mother, his sister-in-law. He had not gestured to Sarah's mother, who sat 3 tables away in a dress she had worn to Emily's wedding 7 years earlier. Daniel's younger brother had made a toast about Daniel finally finding someone who could keep up with him. Emily had whispered to Sarah, "They really love their own last name, don't they?" It was the kindest thing anyone in Sarah's family had said all night. Sarah had told herself these were normal wedding tensions. Families blending, personalities adjusting. She had told herself it would smooth out after the ceremony. She had been wrong. The breaking point had come on the wedding day itself, before the ceremony had even started. Sarah had opened Ruth's envelope that morning in the bridal suite. Inside had been a handwritten letter on Ruth's monogrammed stationery and a check for $50,000. The letter had been brief. This is yours, not for the wedding, for after. For the first year, the first house, the first fight about money. They're going to try to make you small. Don't let them. Build your table. Invite who you want. I love you more than piano lessons and good manners. Ruth. Sarah had folded the letter back into the envelope and placed it in her wedding day emergency kit. Then she'd gone downstairs to find her mother standing in the hallway outside the bridal suite, holding a garment bag. Caroline and her sister were inside the suite, rearranging the flower arrangements and debating whether the lighting was flattering enough for photographs. Sarah's mother had said, I brought your great-grandmother's pearls. I thought you might want to wear them. Sarah had thanked her and taken the pearls. Caroline had glanced at them when Sarah put them on and said, Oh, how sweet. Heirloom costume jewelry. The ceremony had been beautiful. The reception had been a systematic erasure. When the guests had arrived at the ballroom, Sarah had noticed immediately that the seating chart had been changed. Her parents, who were supposed to be at the head table with Daniel's parents and the wedding party, had been moved to table 14, tucked in the corner near the service entrance. Her aunt and uncle, who had driven from Ohio, were at table 16. Emily and her family were at table 12. Every single one of Daniel's relatives, including cousin Sarah, had never met, were seated in the first 4 rows of tables radiating out from the head table. Sarah had found Caroline near the DJ booth directing the playlist. Why were my parents moved? Sarah had asked. Caroline had not looked up from her notes. Oh, darling, we realized we needed more room at the front for the Whitmore side. Your family is so much smaller. We thought they'd be more comfortable in a quieter section. The welcome toast had come 20 minutes into the reception. Richard had stood, champagne glass raised, and spoken for 6 minutes about the Whitmore family values, the importance of ambition and legacy, and his pride in watching Daniel choose a partner who shared their vision for the future. He had thanked Caroline for planning such a flawless event. He had thanked the vendors, the venue, the florist. He had not thanked Sarah's parents. He had not mentioned them at all. Sarah had looked across the room. Her father was staring at his plate. Her mother was folding and refolding her napkin. The cake cutting had been next. Caroline had positioned the photographer to capture only the Whitmore side of the room. When Sarah's mother had stepped forward to take a photograph on her phone, Caroline had gestured to the venue coordinator, who had gently redirected her back to table 14. The first dance had been choreographed by a dance instructor Caroline had hired without telling Sarah. The mother-son dance had been announced with fanfare. The father-daughter dance had not been announced at all. Sarah had found the DJ during a transition between songs. You're supposed to call my father up for the father-daughter dance, she had said. The DJ had checked his notes. I don't have that on the timeline Mrs. Whitmore gave me. She said we're going straight to the anniversary dance after this. That was when Sarah had seen her mother walk toward the exit. She had been holding her coat and the gift envelope she had brought, the one that probably contained a check for far more than her parents could afford. She had not been crying, but her face had been set in the expression Sarah recognized from every disappointment of her childhood, the look that said, We are not the kind of people who make a scene. Sarah had made a decision in that moment. She had crossed the dance floor, taken the microphone from the DJ before he could start the anniversary dance, and stepped into the center of the room. The ballroom had fallen silent. 250 guests had turned to look at her. Daniel had been standing near the cake table, mid-conversation with his college roommate. Caroline had been near the bar, her face already tightening. Sarah's voice had been calm. She had not raised it. She had not needed to. Thank you all for being here tonight, she had said. I want to take a moment to acknowledge some people who seem to have been forgotten in tonight's celebration. My parents, John and Margaret Mitchell, are sitting at table 14. That's the table near the kitchen, in case you were wondering where to find them. They drove 4 hours to be here today. My father walked me down the aisle this morning. My mother gave me the pearls I'm wearing, which belonged to my great-grandmother and are not, despite what you may have heard, costume jewelry. The room had been so quiet that Sarah could hear the kitchen staff behind the service doors. Caroline's face had gone white. Richard had set down his drink. Sarah had continued. My grandmother Ruth, who passed away 3 months ago, left me a letter I opened this morning. In it, she told me to build my own table and invite who I want. I thought I had done that. I thought this wedding was a table where both families would be welcome. But it seems that one family has decided this table belongs to them. She had paused. She had looked directly at Caroline. My parents have paid for half of this wedding. The flowers you rearranged this morning. The champagne you're drinking right now. The band you hired without consulting me. Half of that came from a couple who make a combined $60,000 a year and who have been saving for this day since I was 16. Someone had gasped. Sarah thought it might have been Emily. Here's what's going to happen next, Sarah had said. The DJ is going to play the song I chose for the father-daughter dance. My father is going to come up here and dance with me. Then we're going to cut the cake again, and this time, both mothers are going to stand with us for photographs. Then we're going to reset the seating chart, and my parents are going to sit where they were supposed to sit in the first place. At the head table, next to me, she had turned to Daniel. If that doesn't work for your family, they're welcome to leave. But this is my wedding, and these are my parents, and I will not watch them be erased from the most important day of my life. The silence had held for another beat. Then Sarah's father had stood up from table 14. He had crossed the dance floor, his eyes wet but his shoulders straight. The DJ had started the song, something slow and old-fashioned that Sarah's father had chosen months ago. They had danced for 3 minutes while the entire ballroom watched. When the song had ended, her father had kissed her forehead and whispered, "Ruth would be proud of you." The rest of the evening had unfolded with surreal precision. Caroline and Richard had left during the father-daughter dance. They had not said goodbye. They had simply stood, gathered their things, and walked out. Daniel's brother and his wife had followed. By the time the cake was cut the second time, with both mothers standing beside Sarah and both sets of parents at the head table, 11 members of the Whitmore family had left the reception. The remaining guests, mostly Sarah's college friends, Daniel's co-workers, and cousins who barely knew the senior Whitmores, had stayed. The party had continued until midnight. Daniel had not spoken to Sarah for the rest of the reception. He had danced with her for the required dances and smiled for the required photographs. In the car back to the hotel, he had stared out the window and said, "You humiliated my parents." Sarah had said, "They humiliated mine first." They had not spoken again that night. The consequences had arrived in waves over the following weeks. Daniel's parents had canceled the check they had written for their half of the wedding expenses, forcing Sarah and her parents to cover the outstanding vendor balances. Richard had called Daniel twice a day for the first week, each call ending with Daniel pale and silent. Caroline had sent a group email to the extended Whitmore family explaining that Sarah had caused a scene and disrespected them in front of their closest friends. Half of Daniel's relatives had stopped responding to Sarah's messages. The other half had sent carefully worded notes saying they hoped everyone could move past this unfortunate incident. Daniel had asked Sarah to apologize. She had refused. He had asked her to write a letter to his parents explaining that she had been emotional and overwhelmed. She had refused. He had stopped asking. The marriage had lasted 11 months. The divorce had been quiet and efficient. Daniel had kept the apartment in Chicago. Sarah had taken Ruth's $50,000 and moved to Portland, where she knew no one and owed no one an explanation. 3 years after the wedding, Sarah sat at a kitchen table in a craftsman bungalow she had bought with Ruth's money and the savings from her new job at a regional newspaper. Across from her sat her partner Maya, a public defender with strong hands and a laugh that filled rooms. Sarah's parents visited twice a year now, and when they did, they sat at this table and ate meals that Sarah cooked without apology. Her mother had said during the last visit, "I should have said something that day. At the dress fitting, at the rehearsal, I should have said something." Sarah had reached across the table and held her mother's hand. "You're saying something now?" she had told her. Emily called every Sunday. They talked about their children, their work, their parents' health. They did not talk about the wedding often, but when they did, Emily always said the same thing. "I wish I'd had your courage." The table in Sarah's kitchen seated 6. It was made of reclaimed wood, scratched and imperfect. The chairs did not match. The meals served, there were never photographed, never performed, never measured against anyone's standard, but Sarah's own. Ruth's letter hung in a frame above the stove, the part about building your own table underlined in red ink. If you are watching this and you recognize yourself in this story, you are not alone. You are allowed to set boundaries at your own wedding. You are allowed to refuse to be erased. You are allowed to choose dignity over keeping the peace. Family is not who pays the most or who speaks the loudest. Family is who shows up, who listens, and who makes room at the table. If someone tells you to be smaller so they can be comfortable, that is not love. That is control. And you do not owe anyone your silence. Drop a comment if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, apologies expire. Boundaries don't.